to be a leader and to become a leader, because you're always becoming a leader, in my view. You may be a leader, but you always have to demonstrate that you are a leader. There's a lot of what I just said there, because it's a process, it's a journey. It doesn't have a destination. There's no one day you can say, I'm a leader, because every day you have to demonstrate leading or leadership. So here's the way I think about it. I think about it as involving this model. Over here are what I call the attributes. The attributes of a leader. And these are things like integrity, these are things like courage, these are things like, and you've seen these lists before. And they go on and on and on. You can even define these, if you want, in a different way, which are the negatives. So these would be the positives, and these would be the negatives. You can't be a suck to be a leader, right? You also have to have incredible integrity. If you don't have integrity, it is a real problem to be a leader. So you have all of those things over there. Then over here, I think of it as all of the different role models that are available to me. You asked me to identify my heroes. I have hundreds. And some of them are people you don't even know, because they're not like Gandhi, they're not like Martin Luther King, because I didn't know them. They're people who to me are living. So I draw a distinction between those who are living, working, and those who are examples, like Gandhi, like Martin Luther King, like people I don't know. So I read about them. I'm constantly researching them. I read biographies, autobiographies to find out about them. So I can inform myself how other leaders actually were leaders, or became leaders, or are leading. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to suggest there. So, and this goes on and on and on and on. Okay, right now, for example, I'm trying to find out a lot more about scientific leaders who are in the early stages of inventing the computer and computing, because I'm fascinated by what they actually did. So I think of these two things together all the time. This, if you want, over here is kind of a list of things that I'm hoping to become, and I think that's an important distinction for you. I'm trying to become these rather than being them. And then over here, these are kind of, as I said, my role models. And the list goes on and on and on. I mean, I'm constantly trying to figure that out. But the other thing I try to do here in terms of living is I talk with them. Like, what did you go through? How did you become a leader? How are you being a leader now? All of these kinds of things. So if you want, all of this is kind of active research that I'm actually doing. So then, having these two things and all the negatives, I think of me as right in here. And I think of this really as situation. This is opportunity, because there are many opportunities for me to, if you want, demonstrate leadership. I did this morning by saying, thank you for the 400 questions, but we won't have time to deal with them all. So I'm going to try and give you something that you can take away about the way I think about it, and the way I most importantly do it. Because it isn't just thinking, it isn't just researching, it isn't just measuring myself against these things, it's actually doing stuff, and that's what that is all about. A student comes to me with a problem. Is it something that I have to demonstrate leadership about, in terms of saying, let me try and help you, let me try and get you to counseling, let me try and help you with your professors, all of these kinds of things. It's situational. I'm going to use a big word now, it's existential. I have to make a very conscious choice to engage in leading. Okay, I mean, I think that's something that's extremely important to me. That in my existence is really to, if you want, demonstrate leadership. I did this morning by saying, thank you for the 400 questions, but we won't have time to deal with them all. So I'm going to try and give you something that you can take away about the way I think about it, and the way I most importantly do it. Because it isn't just thinking, it isn't just researching, It isn't just measuring myself against these things, it's actually doing stuff, and that's what that is all about. A student comes to me with a problem. Is it something that I have to demonstrate leadership about in terms of saying, let me try and help you. Let me try and get you to counseling. Let me try and help you with your professors. All of these kinds of things. It's situational. I'm going to use a big word now. It's existential. I have to make a very conscious choice to engage in leading. Okay, I mean, I think that's something that's extremely important to me. That in my existence is really, if you want, being defined by choosing to be a leader. I don't have to do that. I can just sit back and let things happen and be reactive and very passive. But I see it as choosing to be a leader. A student comes to me and says that she was racially slurred in class. I can sit in that office and do diddly squat, or I can go and talk to the students and say, what is going on? Because this is unacceptable behavior. We do not espouse that in the Humber Business School. Okay, so it is a choice I have to make. And then I have to get up off my big duff and do something about it and engage the people in the class to say, we don't want this kind of thing happening. So this is what I do and what I think about all the time. Sometimes it isn't evident to me that I'm really thinking this way, because I'll say, I remember that Gandhi did this. I think that can inform what I have to do. Or a couple of days after I've done something to demonstrate leadership, hey, that's interesting. Gandhi actually went through that process himself. So this is a living model for me. And you guys know, because I've said this to you all before, it's George Box, the great statistician, who said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. I mean, this is the way I think about this. I know this isn't complete. I know there's textbooks that would say, gosh, there's more to it than this, right? But this is what I can think about every day to kind of inform my leadership. So how are we doing so far?
It's good, Tony.
Yeah.
You actually answered a lot of the questions through this model,
Okay.
and thank you for that. That's very helpful.
All right.
But one thing we would like to know, which is one of our questions, in the living and working field, you talked about you have some heroes.
Yes.
Who would they be? Maybe we don't know them, but we would still like to know.
Sure. Well, let me give you some examples both ways, because I've talked about the historical examples.
Yes.
Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Socrates. I mean, there's any number of people that are living right here.
Some people who.
Okay, so Hugh Sampson.
Yeah.
Hugh Sampson is a living model for me. All of your professors are living models for me. They're all trying to demonstrate leadership in some form or other. And my job is to help them demonstrate that leadership. So in many respects, every professor that I work with is this kind of thing. They're saying to me, I have a challenge in this class. I want to design the curriculum this way. I want to do something different than I've ever done before. So my job is to help them. My job is to encourage them. My job is to be a critic. A good critic and a best critic, not a hostile critic. And really, because in the end, that benefits the students. I can't meet every day with all 500 odd students, but I can meet with the professors and say, what do you need? How can I help? So that is an example of this kind of thing. Other heroes are people who around Humber are doing good things. Like Jose and Tim Hortons, he's trying to manage that a certain way and involve the students. He's demonstrating leadership. So in a way, does that really answer your question?
Yeah.
Or no? Okay.
It does, because you mentioned about Hugh Sampson, you mentioned about the professors, so we could mention all of them. I know Hugh Sampson personally very well, so
well, I was trying to use examples
of people who we know.
Exactly.
Thank you for that.
Right.
One other thing we'd like to ask you is, how do you ensure your organizations and its activities are aligned with your core values?
Right. Yes, because in a way, what I try to do is to have meetings in which I demonstrate this. For instance, at the start of every semester, I meet with all the faculty and the staff, and we have a meeting in which we align our values. We align how we're going to evaluate our students. We align our curriculum. We actually talk about how we're going to plan the whole semester. there's going to be certain key events, like when is the networking event going to happen, and what are we trying to do by actually having that event. The other thing too is that it's an alignment process without imposing values. If I can explain it again, it's valuing. It's not saying, here are my values, you must accept them. Because a lot of it is me actively listening to them to say how can I actually help you? And you can check that out with the faculty, because that's what we do. And then I spend the rest of the next 15 weeks trying to keep that alignment, that kind of consistency. So I'm trying to again, in my situation where I have to demonstrate leadership, that's actually where I do that. Where if a faculty member comes in or a staff member comes in and says, I have this issue, what can I actually do about it? Students are not attending all of the classes, what can we do about it? How can I support them? How can we make sure that those students are actually living up to their promises? So this is what it really amounts to. You also asked about feedback, and it is two-way in my world, in the sense that I have to very actively listen to that feedback. Because a faculty member can say, you know how we wanted to do this, but we can't quite do this. I have to listen to that. I can't automatically say, we have to do it that way, because it may be that there's a breakdown. Something's not right. The students aren't understanding. All of those kinds of things. So feedback to me is a two-way process, where I have to listen to it and then try to react to it. For me, there's usually three responses to feedback. Number one is, thank you very much for the feedback. I will have to bear it in mind and think about it, because it involves quite a change in my behavior and in my attitude, and hopefully not in my values. Number two is, thanks very much for the feedback. I'm going to acknowledge that you gave me the feedback. I'm not going to do anything about it, because it isn't what I want to do, and I'm going to demonstrate leadership in a different way. The third way is that it really does give me a lot to think about, and I'm going to have to really figure out what I have to do to change my behavior. And I find that's the toughest kind, because in a way it's challenging to do that with a deadline. Sometimes you have to really figure out what you're going to do, and you have to figure out how that's going to impact other people. So that's what I do with feedback. Providing feedback is a different thing to me, slightly, in that what I try to do is I'm within this world here of the situation of leadership, and I'm also trying to make very sure that, in fact, the individuals I'm dealing with hear the feedback and really mirror what I do with the three types of feedback. That they're listening to it, trying to figure out whether they can quickly change, or whether they're just going to accept it in that sense and change their behavior, or boy, this is going to require a really substantial change in my behavior. So what do I have to do?
So talking about feedback,
yeah.
When it has to do with maybe a criticism,
yeah,
of maybe your action or your decision,
yeah,
maybe it may be to you may view it as negative criticism or something like that.
Yeah.
Would this still your three responses?
It's still the same three responses,
okay.
And I accept the fact that it's negative, because I'm under criticism all the time, because I'm actually interacting with other people.
Sure.
I mean, I am not an isolate in the sense that again I can hole up somewhere and pay no attention to what other people, or faculty, staff, students, my academic bosses are saying. I have to live in that moment of recognizing everything I do is being observed and has consequences for other people. So I have to accept that. I assume that everything I do is not going to be consequence-free. That's the word. Everything I do has consequences. I mean, I could theoretically be meeting with other students other than you guys. There's a consequence to my decision to actually be here to do this session with you. That's just an example of what I'm saying. And those students may say, well, he has no time for us. He just has time for these 4 people, and I have to deal with that, right? So everything I do is under criticism, under evaluation. But the key point there for me is I have to manage that. I have to lead that. If, in fact, as a number of students say, you're not giving us access, I'm responsible for that. I have to meet with them and say, sorry, I had these 4 students who wanted to wanted help with a project. They were arranging a videotaping. It required some time, but now I have time for you, so let's actually arrange to do it. In other words, I have to accept the responsibility of doing it. I can't just allow it to fester and be talked about over in the L building cafeteria. I want to try and do something about it.
Thank you, Tony. One other thing, which I would really like to know, it's a conflict of interest between your core values and organizational values.
Yeah.
I know that it's not always the same. There might be something from the organization that you might not be agreeing with, and something of yours that the organization might not be agreeing with. In that kind of a situation, what would you generally do?
Leave. Yeah, and I have done that. I mean, I have worked in organizations where there has not been that alignment. That's a very critical point you're raising, because if there's not an alignment or a congruence in values, boy, I mean, this is really serious. This, unfortunately, leads to another model. Within this situation, what I find is that this is my behavior, if I can draw it that big dot.
No problem.
Then lying underneath that are in effect, several things. One are my deep-seated values. Then the other one too is that you've got attitudes here. I'm going to call them beliefs rather than attitudes. I think that's a better way to do it.
Okay.
These are the beliefs and these are the attitudes. And you've probably seen this before. It's not as though I'm the first one. I find that if people are asking me to change my attitudes, I can do that quite often. I find, though, that when they're starting to touch my beliefs and values and there's not an agreement, we're in for a conflict. I've worked in organizations, particularly with leaders who don't align with my values, my beliefs, my attitudes, and we've been in conflict. And I try, in the best way possible, to try and align that, to seek a congruence. Sometimes it doesn't happen. I've left those organizations. Because to me, it's more important to work in an organization where these things are aligned. And God bless Humber, because they enable that. If there is, the academic community is full of argument, discussion, debate, analysis. It's a wonderful community. But from that standpoint, I've had to work in organizations in both the private and the not-for-profit sector, where a boss has said, "This is my way, and it's going to be your way," and it was leading into behavior and attitudes and values that I did not espouse. I left and found somewhere else to go where I could actually practice this. I have worked for jerks, and it's one of the most painful things in anybody's career. And I'm sure that from that standpoint, managing jerks is one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. And I have been blessed in that I've worked my way out of those situations because I don't find them very useful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly. One other thing, Tony, we've learned in our leadership class that there are basically various styles of leadership, such as democratic, autocratic, laissez-faire. Yeah. What would we all know you're not very autocratic?
Well, how would you describe it?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. According to us, as far as we've seen you to be very democratic. Mm-hmm. We've not seen you to be an authoritarian or a leader who imposes. Yeah. We've seen you are more of the delegating type rather than the imposing type. Yes, so would that be correct? Because I don't know how you are with employees or maybe with your staff.
I think you beautifully summed it up. In the academic community, it is very necessary to be, in that sense, democratic, because there is a tension always between the academic freedom of a professor and what the responsibilities are of the organization, of Humber in that sense. Mm-hmm. That tension is real to all of us. We're all trying to accommodate and live by. I think the democratic, to borrow your typology, is the way that I choose to do it. That's why, for instance, I have those curriculum planning sessions. Mm-hmm. Because it's not as though we all are agreeing. No, there is debate, there's discussion, there's a figuring out. Sometimes I do have to delegate people to find a solution. Right now, we're wrestling with an awful lot of ideas about simulations and role plays and things. Mm-hmm. And we actually have a small committee of faculty that is trying to figure out what we should do. So I think that's a living example of what you're saying. Delegation is something that I can do in the sense that, for instance, the placement advisor, V.G. Prakash, and I worked through a series of delegations where she has undertaken the responsibility of pre-approving internships so that everybody gets a really good one. She then tells me what's going on. It literally, for 500 odd students to do that and have 2 or 3 people do it becomes inefficient. And the students need to know that they have a counselor, an advisor. So I delegate that to VG. And to her credit, she's always keeping me up to date with what situations are, what has to be done. And it's the same way with the faculty that I work with too as well, that we help each other through those processes and situations, because they're in this world too, the situation. Yeah.
And so basically it's more towards democratic, but what about in a situation where you would need autocratic, where you would need to be autocratic?
So that's a very good point, because in a sense what I rely on is that I have built up enough credibility, integrity, professional behavior, that when something has to be imposed, I can rely on the faculty and the staff to impose it. For example, we recently had a situation where a number of people were engaging in academic misconduct, and they were cheating during a test. And so what I had to rely on was the fact that the faculty would first of all try to identify that, try to manage that, and we realized it was happening across a number of courses. So I had to impose into that, I had to intervene into that situation and say, right, for all of these courses, this is what's going to happen. And it did happen. It didn't involve your particular program, but the faculty involved knew that we had to align very, very quickly to sort that out. And so I had to impose authoritatively, it seemed, a solution, when in fact I was relying on the fact that we had democratically worked out what we wanted to do for academic misconduct and to intervene into it. Is that helpful?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Right.
Another thing, Tony, it's
How are we doing?
are we good on time?
No, we're good on time. Absolutely.
I
hope
appreciate.
this is giving you what you want.
Yeah,
Sure.
but we appreciate you giving the time.
No,
though.
that's what I'm here for.
One other thing, Tony, we've seen how you interact with students and how you help them out. What about
How am I doing so far?
Yeah, it's going okay. How about with employees? Because you're constantly having to lead new employees that are part of the business school.
Yeah.
What do you do when you have to train a new employee?
Sure. It's again a very good question, because they're also training me. I think a living example of this is the placement advisor, because VG came in after we'd had two predecessors in that role who had immense problems with the role. And again, what happened was, when VG came in, she came in at a particular point, and her training had to be very quick, very diligent, in fact, very fast. So the result was that we actually talked through this kind of thing, like what did she want to do within the role, because she was a very experienced placement advisor, but she wanted to know how we did it here in our postgraduate program. So I worked with her and in fact had her declare for me what she wanted to do, what processes she used, what the procedures were, all of those kinds of things. And then she trained me in terms of how she wanted to do it, and then we worked out how we wanted to do it within the three programs that I coordinate. So I call that inboarding as well as training, that they're coming into a new organization, even though they've been a part of the organization previously. If someone's totally from the outside, it takes longer, because they're translating what they did outside to actually what they're going to do in Humber. So that does take a little longer time. You're asking another question which is very important, and that is, how do I train myself
For
to do
example,
this?
after Rosie left and Amber came.
Rosie and Amber, exactly. When Rosie took on, we were thrilled for Rosie that she took on that new job. That's just going to be a real career maker for Rosie. We're so delighted. Well, Amber had to come in, and we had to work with her in terms of, well, this is the way we have done it in the past, because this was Rosie, but you're Amber, so how do you want to do it? And then, okay, and so it becomes a form of improvisation and accommodation. It also becomes a real problem of active listening too as well, because you want to make very sure that everybody is comfortable in doing it, and we're still exploring that, no question about it. So, and then the other question that I'm sure is latent in what you're saying is, how do I train myself to do this? And as I think you can see, it's a continuous improvement process. Not every day do I score 100. There are lots of days I go home and say, well, what worked? I ask myself three questions there. What worked well? Because something did. Even the fact that I made it to work that day, if that's the basis point we can use, fine. But it's usually something more than that. Something significant went well, but a lot didn't go well. So I don't sit around and go, oh, woe is me. I try to then say, okay, what did not go well enough yet? I think you actually heard me say this, because I know that it's up to me to change my behavior, change my attitude, whatever. and then from that standpoint, figure out what has to be done. So that's what I do. And then I say, okay, now that I figured out what I have to do to change, what I now have to do is actually do it. So if I say, for example, that I'm going to engage more intensely in active listening, for example, I try to do that. And I feed back to myself what's going on. You may have heard me talk about I'll go over here. You've heard me talk about the learning curve. I describe it like this. And then, as you may or may not remember, when you want to do something new, you don't necessarily succeed right away. And then eventually I find you get it. And then you put it into action and behavior. And then it gets boring. It gets routine. And so I have to figure out what other kinds of new opportunities for learning I'm going to engage in, and I have to jump onto them. I literally have to jump onto them. And then it's the same old learning curve again. It just never stops.
But Joseph, why don't you ask something? I've been asking a lot, so.
Tony, please, would like to know, from your perspective, what will be those very successful attributes a leader should have, especially when dealing with new employees and
sense of humor, knowledge of great single malt Scotch.
Wow.
No, I'm just kidding. I think a sense of humor is really very important, actually, because when you look at this, list of attributes that most people have agreed on are important to a leader, it's daunting. It's very, very demanding. And in a way, you have to work very hard to achieve all of it or even some of it. So the demands are really long, to say the least, and daunting, as I said. So the result is that I have to figure out which are the ones that, for me, are most important or the ones that are most useful. Because I can just keep inventing these all the time. And again, this is research. You've seen the size of your textbook. It has chapters on each one of these, So the thing then I find is how can I put it into my situation? How can I actually use it? How can I demonstrate that I'm thinking of these things and trying to demonstrate them here? I don't have many situations where I have to say to a group, no, sorry, this is the way it's going to be. I'm more the type of leader, democratic is your description of it, that says, okay, I've heard you all, I've got all the advice, I see where the different conflicts and different points of view are, but here's what we're going to do. Okay, and then by doing it in that way, I find most people say, okay, he heard me, he understands my point of view, I'm going to try it. The other thing I work on very, very hard is in the go forward, if it's not working, let's stop. What's working well, what's not working well enough yet, what do we have to do to turn it around? So I actually use the same process with other people as I use in my own continuous improvement process. Is that helpful?
Yeah. So just want to chip in one more question.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, what is one mistake that leaders make in a leadership position?
Well, it's an excellent question for me because I'd have to say all the time. This is a very human drama in my view. I don't always get it right. I'm trying to, but I don't always get it right. So from that standpoint, to me, it's being understanding and patient, and not necessarily beating myself up relentlessly to say, what's going on here, and hoping that other people respect that and have the patience with it. But so I can't talk about what a lot of other leaders do until I get over here, because Gandhi did demonstrate a lot of impatience, to say the least, and then dealt with it. Anger management was another one I gathered from his biographies that was very critical. He learned to manage that. So I learned from that. One of my weaknesses is impatience, but it's also the energy that gives me the drive to do what I do. So I bridge and leverage my weaknesses into somewhat the strengths. I do all of those kinds of things. I don't just talk about it. I try to do it. Right? Is that helpful?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Have I helped you? Do you sort of get this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I know you've got a big assignment due on it, so I want to make sure you.
We also have to present on that. So when we're presenting in class, we would like to present this.
Take this with you.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you if we could take this. Because instead of throwing it away, better it says in my class.
And the other thing too is if people are saying, well, he may believe that, but that's not the way it's like at all, then let me know the feedback, okay? because that
Oh
would be
no,
important to me.
I'm sure no one's going to say
Well,
that.
I would hope they would. They'd say, well, great ideas, Tony, but here's where you let us down. That's what it's all about. A person who is in leadership is in the fishbowl all the time. And so everything you do has consequences. And you have to, I think, learn how to live and work with them, and how you have to live and work with people who respect that, because they're in the same journey. Joseph?
So do you believe there's a particular characteristic that all leaders should have?
Sense of humor. Yeah, and a really deep understanding of humanity.
And you have that in chocolates.
Well, some days, my mother used to say to me, laughing is better than crying.
Sure.
And I think it's actually very true for me, because if you don't have that, then I find, I can't talk for everybody else, but I find that after a while it just gets me down, and I don't choose to live that way. My glass is half full, always. Yeah.
One other thing what we students would like to add is that what we've seen in you is a phenomenal amount of energy all the time. Like, I've never
That's what the single malt scotch helps. No, I'm just kidding.
We've actually never seen you be tired or be fatigued.
Yeah,
we've always seen you
Superman.
full of energy.
Well, there is a persona. Because I find if I come in here when I am tired or I am fatigued and portray that, then it affects other people. And I think that's something that a leader does. Yeah. That not you, but I pay that price. You're on, if I can put it that way. I recognize that a lot of what I do is the way I'm acting and reacting. So I do try to be positive. And nothing is worse to me than coming in.
Energy is very useful for students because normally students are tired.
Yeah.
They're fatigued, but when they see you, then we get back our energy levels.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, see, that proves the point, I guess, that I'm trying to make, Saeed, and I think that is very important. You're trying to be the role model of yourself.
Because normally I've seen that when students come to you with a problem, they might not be so comfortable if it was someone else who would be a little more autocratic, or maybe he wouldn't be as energetic or as positive. But when anyone comes to you, they know that they're going to get the problem resolved immediately. Tony's going to be there to cooperate. He doesn't have to worry, or she doesn't have to worry, as long as you're there. That's
very kind.
That's what I've seen for a lot of the students. I can't tell about the other programs, but in my program...
Do you want me to give you the $20 now?
You're just kidding.
Yeah, there's Maria. Yeah. No, but look, guys, I'm going to have to move on because I do have another meeting to go to. But,
just one last thing.
I hope I gave you what you want.
Yeah, just 2 minutes of your time.
Sure.
We'd like to just know that how you came to becoming in this position, like where you started off.
Well, I actually, I started off my career being in education. No. And then at about the age of 39, I went into for-profit management consulting. And stayed there for probably the next 20 odd years, maybe a little less. And then almost serendipitously, a colleague of mine who at that time was on the Humber board said, you should come back to teaching for a while. And so I spent a number of years both teaching and working. And then the result of that was that Peter Madat and Alvina Cassiani asked me if I would serve as a program coordinator. So I did that too as well. And I'm still doing that at the present time. I have no idea what the future will hold, but I'm looking forward to it.
For how long have you been doing that?
I've been teaching at Humber since 2004 on a part-time basis. Okay. Yeah, so whatever that number is.
But you've been the coordinator since 2004?
No. I was not the coordinator until 2000 and beginning of 2010. 2010. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's actually 2009. Part of 2009 was when I came into the role.
So from 2009 till date, any regrets?
None.
Any highlights of your career?
Well, I think seeing the students at convocation, that's a real highlight to me because that's the summation of everything.
Sure.
And I have a tradition, which a number of us involved, that if your faculty members are at convocation, they stand when you're proceeding up to the stage on the stairs. We shake your hand and say, best of luck, congratulations, may it all work out, and then they go forward. That to me is the greatest moment. particularly if if you've been working with students who've had real challenges and they've risen to the challenge and they've tried to do well, or they've had difficulties and risen above them. That really makes my day. That's why I do what I do.
Okay.
I think the other thing is where a student in the postgrad programs gets a significant job, a significant internship, starts a new venture. All of those are the things that give me what I call reward value.
Okay.
Okay.
Finally,
Yeah.
one word for people like us looking up to you as a leader.
Well, fearlessness,
Okay.
absolute fearlessness. Don't be afraid, because it's to me it's the killer app. It's the thing that people most readily go to, but it's actually being fearless that gets you through. Not necessarily having the answer right away, believing that there is a solution, knowing that you're going to be able to find it, or you and others are going to find it, and you carry on that basis. No sense being afraid.
Perfect. Thank you so
Okay,
much for your
yeah.
time, Tony.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, no, good Lord. Thank you.